You ever get hit with a memory so sharp it makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? That's what's been keeping me up these nights, folks. I'm just an old man now, a 70-year-old ex-welder living in a beat-up trailer by the railroad tracks. But back in '81, I was a young man, full of sweat and dreams, picking apples off the neighbor's tree with my brother Joel, thinking we'd beat the world together. It was a humid Louisiana night when I first caught that scent of gasoline and fear, the way a breeze carries the last whiff of summer rain into your bones. I remember the crude hush of the gas station, the flicker of neon through the rain-slick pavement, and the click of a Zippo lighter rolling across the counter, mine, with my initials carved on the side like a kid marking his territory. Signed that lighter was the only thing left at the scene when they cuffed me for murdering a police officer, no less. I was 19 and scared half to death, but nothing scared me more than the cold realization that my own spark had doomed me. By the time you're hearing this, I spent a lifetime trying to make sense of how a simple twist of fate can break a man. Now, I'm no preacher, but if you're moving down memory lane with me, do me a favor and tap that like button, or drop a comment if you're walking a hard road of your own. Helps a lonely old-timer know he ain't talking to empty air. Chuckle softly, I'm not looking for pity, mind you, just some human connection. See, what haunts me ain't the 19 days of interrogation, shackled in a cold cell, trying to keep my sanity, or the 27 years behind thick bars where hope got traded for shadows. It's the moment I realized the world believed me guilty before I could say innocent. And most of all, it's the ache that settled in my chest when I thought of Joel, my own kin, who came round for a visit that night and vanished just as quick, leaving me to take the fall. That lighter with my initials, it wasn't mine to leave behind, but it was all they needed. So here I am, speaking into this camera like it's the porch on a summer evening, telling you why this story still lingers in my heart. It's not about courtrooms or headlines. It's about trust, how we give it away blind, how we hold on to it when the world rips it out of our hands, and how, sometimes, it's the one thing worth more than freedom itself. I ain't yet figured out why I survived those years of steel doors and whispered threats, but one thing's for sure, no matter how many sunsets I've watched from this old rocker, that night in '81 still stirs my blood. And I reckon if you stick around, I'll tell you how I found out the truth, how I learned that the monster wasn't some stranger in the dark, but the brother I once swore I'd stand beside. So, lean in close, and I promise, you'll hear about the day my world shattered, and why forgiveness felt like chainmail against a storm I never saw coming. I can still feel the sun bleeding through the Spanish moss that draped the oaks back then, soft golden needles tickling my eyelids when I'd lie on my back in Mrs. Harper's pasture, watching them clouds drift by like lazy barges on the Mississippi. That was me at 10, just a scrawny kid with skin knees, barefoot most days, hunting fireflies in the twilight and dreaming I'd grow up to be someone mighty important. My ma kept a patchwork quilt draped over every chair in our little shotgun house, each square telling its own story. A bit of my daddy's old work shirt, a scrap from my ma's Sunday dress, and a piece of pillowcase embroidered by my grandma Louise back when she was just a girl. Every morning the scent of coffee and cornbread would swirl through the rooms, and the clack of Daddy's boots on the porch meant we'd all gather round the table before the church bell tolled. We didn't have much. Electricity winked out more often than the moon, but we had each other, and I believed that was plenty. My brother Joel and I, we were inseparable. He was 3 years my senior, always leading the charge when it came to mischief, like the time we stacked every chair in the living room just so we could slide down the banister in a parade. We thought ourselves invincible, running barefoot through the cotton fields at dusk, laugh echoes rolling over the furrows. I had big ideas even then. I'd tell Joel I'd build a farm one day, with rows of corn as tall as the pines, and he'd laugh and say he'd furnish it with his outlaw dreams. "You'll see, little brother," he said, eyes gleaming, "we'll make something of ourselves." And I believed him, 'cause I believed in us. Sundays meant church, hot, crowded pews where old Mr. Patterson sang louder than a gospel choir, and my ma's hymns rose sweet and clear. Back then I believed kindness was the greatest currency a man could spend, and that God's grace would always bring folks back to the righteous path. I'd watch Joel kneel at the altar, head bowed, praying like his heart might just burst with devotion. I thought his faith so strong it could move the earth. After service we'd walk home hand in hand, stomping through puddles if it had rained, and he'd spin tall tales about what we'd be when we grew up. He'd be the preacher, I'd be the carpenter, building churches for him to share his words. Sweet, innocent nonsense, but I swallowed it whole, so sure of our future as the cotton was white in the fields. Evenings were lantern-lit and peaceful. Daddy would rock on the porch with his corncob pipe, puffing slow rings of smoke while Mama hummed low, watching the fireflies blink on. I'd perch on the rail, ears cocked for the screech of an owl, heart filling with that tender ache of belonging. I was just a boy who believed people always stayed true, that mistakes were like bad weather, would pass, and the sun shine right back through. I didn't know about darkness then, didn't know betrayal could live in your own blood. All I knew was laughter, the smell of honeysuckle, the taste of cherry syrup from the general store, and the warmth of Joel's grin when he'd sneak me an extra piece of candy. Grandma Louise used to say, "Child, life's a river. It flows easy when you respect its banks." I took those words to heart. Little did I know the current could turn violent, capsize you without warning. But at that age, my mind was a garden of hope, watered by faith and family. I believed in tomorrow the way a robin trusts the sunrise. And I believed my brother Joel would stand by me, come hell or high water. That belief, that simple, steadfast trust, would be the very thing that'd haunt me when the world cracked open and showed me just how sharp a memory can cut. I remember the day it all shifted, how a single knock on that rickety screen door sent my heart into a frantic rhythm I'd never felt before. It was a late summer afternoon in '79, the cicadas droning like old men swapping secrets, and I'd just finished bussing plates in the little diner down on Maple Street. Mama's voice still echoed in my head, "Don't be late for supper, Henry," when I stepped inside to find an unfamiliar letter pinned under Mom's vase of daisies. No return address, just my name scrawled in a shaky hand I couldn't place. My pulse rattled in my ears as I tore it open. Inside was a single photograph of a girl I'd never met, around 16, auburn hair in a braid, eyes the color of rain-slick pavement. On the back, for words, "Meet me by the church." I stood frozen for a long beat, that photo burning warm in my hand. Joel would have scoffed, "You in love with a ghost now?" But something about her gaze reached right inside me, tugged me forward. I slipped out of my work shirt, scratched out a note for Mama, running late. Jing came by and let the sun chase me down the dusty road toward the old chapel. My boots kicked up pebbles as my mind whipped through every excuse. Who sent this? What did she want? Why me? When I rounded the corner, there she was, leaning against the chipped white siding, backlit by slanting sunlight. My breath hitched like I'd swallowed a bee. She looked older than her years, poised with an unspoken burden. I cleared my throat, swallowed hard, and said, "You the one in the picture?" Her lips quivered into a half-smile as she handed me a folded page, typed, mechanical, alien. It was from Officer Daniels, the very man I'd met only twice, once at church youth outings, once when he pulled me over for speeding. He'd written to warn me, "There's talk at the station. Names whispered. Bad things stirring. I don't know who to trust, except you." My head spun. The town was small. Secrets spread quicker than fire in dry grass. Who was playing puppet master, and why pull me into their tangled strings? I felt that familiar jolt of fear, sharp as lightning, but beneath it, a fierce spark of purpose. This was no idle intrigue. It was the first crack in the veneer of everyday life, the moment when innocence fractures. She introduced herself as Clara, neighbor's kid from 2 blocks over, shy as a fawn but brave enough to hand me that letter. Her father was Officer Daniels, she explained, voice quivering like the last leaf in autumn. He'd stumbled onto a ring of corruption, people he once trusted now moving in shadows. He feared for his life, and now he'd vanished. I stared at Clara, heart pounding so loud I swear she could hear it. In that instant, I didn't see a girl, I saw my own brother's lost look. That same mix of hope and recklessness that had carried us through childhood scrapes. "I'll help," I rasped, voice rough as gravel. She nodded, relief softening her features. That afternoon set 1,000 wheels in motion. It was the first time I realized how fragile the world could be, how a single choice, a single hidden truth, could tip everything into chaos. I walked Clara home under that fading sun, our shadows long and tangled like the questions knotting my mind. I couldn't know then that this little spark would grow into the conflagration that swallowed me years later. But I didn't know this. When you're young, you believe you can fix the world with good intentions and grit. And so, in that moment, I vowed to Clara and to myself that I'd follow this mystery to its end, no matter where it led. Because sometimes the people who walk into your life carry the weight of the storms to come, and you've got to decide whether you'll turn away or stand your ground. In the years since, I've learned how high the price can be for standing your ground. But I never forgot that summer day, or the girl who dared to knock and ask for help. It was the beginning of knowing that nothing stays the same, and that one unexpected encounter can change a man's destiny forever. I never saw the storm coming, not at first. After Clara handed me that letter, I thought I'd slipped into a mystery I could untangle with a bit of grit and heart. But life's no neat puzzle, and that's when the first cracks began to show. It started slow, whispers in the diner where I'd worked since I was 14, old faces I'd known all my life casting hard looks, like I'd grown a second head overnight. One afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins, the waitress, dropped a plate so it shattered at my feet. She didn't even look at me when I bent to help. "Can't trust folks these days," she muttered through her teeth, and left me to sweep the pieces alone. My skin crawled with shame, but I held my tongue, because speaking up only makes you stick out more. The next blow came at home. Mama, bless her heart, tried to mention a letter once over supper, voice trembling like a leaf. "Henry, are you sure you should be poking into things?" But Daddy cut her off sharp, eyes flashing. "It's none of our business," he barked, and I felt the air go cold as the grave. I loved those two more than anything, yet I couldn't bear to look at them, not knowing if they thought I'd brought danger to our front door. That night, I lay awake listening to the floorboards creak under the weight of all that unset fear. It wasn't long before the station called me in. Officer Mills, a man with a gut the size of a barrel and a face that could curdle milk, said they had questions about Daniel's disappearance. He leaned across the desk so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath and asked if I had seen Clara again. My heart pounded like a hammer, and I told him the truth. I hadn't, but he didn't seem to believe me. He tapped a file full of notes and photos, then leaned back with a smirk. "Funny how you two popped up right when things got sticky," he said, voice low. Suddenly, I felt eyes on me, every cop in that room sizing me up, waiting for me to crack. I walked out that day under a sky so gray it looked like the world had run out of color. The only comfort was the drizzle that masked my tears. I'd never felt so small, so helpless. My own town turned its back on me, and I couldn't help blaming myself for the suspicion that clung to my clothes like mud. Inside, doubt began to gnaw at me. What if I led Clara into danger? What if her father's fate became mine? I was caught between my promise to help and the fear of losing everything. My job, my home, my very name. Nights were the worst, when the shadows in my trailer stretched long and whispered the worst-case scenarios into my ears. I'd wake in a cold sweat, heart racing, mind replaying every word I'd said to Mills, every look I'd given a neighbor. Shame burned in my chest like acid, and through it all, Joel was nowhere to be found. Not a letter, not a call. I'd sheltered him in my memories, the rambunctious big brother who'd taught me to climb trees and dream big, but now his absence felt like another betrayal. Why didn't he ever show up? I'd think in the dark, clutching the quilt Mom made, wishing for someone, anyone, to tell me it'd all be okay. That's when the ultimatum came. I was fired from the diner. Too much trouble, they said, handing me my paycheck. No farewell, no handshake, just the cold slap of reality. I staggered out into the heat, blood pounding in my temples, watching the only life I'd known slip through my fingers. With each step away from that place, I felt the world shrinking. The safety of routine, the comfort of familiar faces, it all vanished. In those early days of trouble, I learned that fear can twist you inside out, and loneliness can sound louder than a freight train on the tracks behind my trailer. I felt trapped between keeping my promise to Clara and saving whatever dignity I had left. And in that struggle, I discovered that the hardest battles aren't fought with fists or guns, they're fought in your own mind and your own heart, where doubt and shame stand guard at every door. That's what truly tested me before the real nightmare even began. I remember the day it all came crashing down like it was yesterday, though the world around me seemed to freeze in that moment. I was behind the counter at Marcus's Gas and Go, wiping down the pump handles in the late afternoon sun, when I heard the heavy boots thundering on the concrete. Before I could register fear, the door burst open and a pair of deputies stormed in, faces set like flint. They barked at everyone to freeze, but all I could see was their eyes searching mine, as if they'd already decided I was guilty. One shoved the photograph of that gas station, same pump, same cracked tile, into my hands and growled, "Recognize this place, bub." My heart pounded so loud I thought the whole building would hear it. I swallowed, voice caught in my throat, and managed a nod, though I was only 20 years old and as innocent as a lamb. Then they showed me the evidence. My Zippo lighter, the one I'd carried in my coat pocket like a good luck charm, found at the scene of the killing. The initials HE carved crudely into its side were unmistakable, proof enough for them that I was the man who'd taken a good cop's life in cold blood. "They say you killed Daniels," one deputy spat, slamming my shoulder. The pain shot through me, but it was nothing compared to the ache of betrayal, because in that second I realized I'd been set up, and I didn't even know why. Time slowed to a crawl, the late day's sun turning every speck of dust into floating diamonds, the hum of the fluorescent lights above me singing a silent requiem. I tried to speak, to tell them they had the wrong man, that I'd never seen Officer Daniels except on Sunday mornings at church, but my words came out as a whisper, drowned by the shouts of bystanders and the slamming of cell doors. They threw me into a cramped interrogation room 2 hours later, the walls closing in like the inside of a coffin. The chief detective flicked on a tape recorder, leaned forward, and said, "Confess, and maybe we'll go easy on ya." I felt a chill, as though the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. My hand shook uncontrollably as he pressed the lighter onto the table, its metal gleaming under the harsh light. I stared at it, a token of my undoing, and in that instant, the weight of every broken promise and lost dream slammed into me. They started with the questions, relentless, accusatory, and when my denial held firm, they moved on to more persuasive methods. First, it was the cuffs tightening around my wrists until the blood pounded in my arms. Then came the blinding lights in the endless hours of sitting on a hard wooden chair, legs numb and back screaming with pain. I remember the cold water dribbling down my collarbone when they submerged my head, the world turning to white noise as panic clawed at my lungs. In between sessions, they'd shove stale sandwiches under the door, as if feeding a prisoner broke his spirit. But the real agony was in the silence between the torments, when my mind spun fears of never seeing home again, of memories fading into the darkness of that room. I lost track of how many days passed, 4, 5, maybe more, my sense of time stolen by the guards who mocked me, called me a murderer and a liar, told me my own flesh and blood had thrown me to the wolves. And in one of those hazy moments, a guard flashed my brother's face on a crumpled photo, whispering, "Your big brother Joel was seen near the station that night." It was the knife twist I never saw coming. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I'd never recover. I realized then that it wasn't just the law I was up against, but the brother I'd trusted most. When I was finally dragged before a judge, shackles clanking with every step, they already had the confession I never spoke, my coerced, broken promise that I'd done it. The jury took 30 minutes to seal my fate. I felt myself dissolve into the courtroom floor as the gavel fell, a hollow sound that echoed inside me long after the crowd filed out. I lost everything in that moment, my freedom, my dignity, my faith in justice, and most terribly, my faith in family. I walked out in chains, a ghost of the man I once was, carrying the knowledge that the truth couldn't save me, and that the brother who'd betrayed me was already gone from my life in every way that mattered. I walked out of those prison gates a broken man, the clang of steel doors fading behind me like a distant thunderstorm. For years afterward, I wandered through mornings that felt empty as a graveyard, the sun rising on a world I no longer recognized. The fields where I once chased fireflies were overgrown. The church steeple where I'd prayed every Sunday looked smaller somehow, like an old promise that had lost its power. I tried to slip back into life, tried to greet old neighbors with a nod, but their eyes darted away, as if I carried a stench no soap could wash away. I furnished my trailer with the few things I still had: Mama's chipped teacups, Daddy's worn Bible, the quilt stitched from memories, but even those comforts felt distant, like relics of someone else's story. Every morning, I woke before the sun, each breath a sharp reminder of freedom's cost. I'd pour strong coffee into a chipped mug and stare out the window at the railroad tracks, watching the rusted boxcars roll by without a care in the world. I'd run my hand over the lighter, still tucked in my pocket, and feel its weight, a cold anchor dragging me back to that night. I stopped believing in second chances. I stopped believing in people. The world seemed to me a place where trust was a luxury no man could afford, and faith was just a brittle hope waiting to shatter. I took odd jobs wherever I could, mowing lawns, fixing fences, odd welding gigs when someone remembered I once did that work. But my hands shook from memories of interrogation rooms, and my eyes flinched at flashing lights, so I never held a steady job. Money dribbled in, barely enough to keep the heater running in winter. I'd eat stale bread and canned beans more nights than I cared to admit, because guilt tasted as bitter as the black coffee I sipped to keep the nightmares at bay. Some nights, when the trailer was too quiet, I'd write in my old prison notebook pages upon pages of thoughts I'd never dared speak aloud. I scrawled about lost dreams and broken trust, about a brother's betrayal that cut deeper than any razor wire. I wrote letters to my daughter I never sent, apologizing for the years I'd missed and the pain I'd carried in silence. I imagined her reading those words and shaking her head, wondering how her old man could vanish for decades and still expect forgiveness. My faith in God, once as sturdy as an oak, withered under the weight of unanswered prayers. I stopped going to church. The hymns felt like echoes of a time when I believed kindness could save the world. Instead, I found myself talking to the night sky, confessing sins I hadn't committed and begging for a mercy I felt I didn't deserve. Sometimes, I'd swear I heard a whisper on the wind, but it was only the rustle of pine needles, reminding me that nature didn't care about my pain. Years slipped by in a blur of cold mornings and sleepless nights. I learned to wear my loneliness like a coat, threadbare and familiar. I didn't seek companionship. I feared my presence would bring trouble to anyone who let me in. My granddaughter would write on holidays, pictures and crayons folded inside her letters, but I handed them unopened to the stove, too scared that love might burn me all over again. In that silence, I discovered a terrible clarity. Life doesn't come with guarantees, and some wounds never heal. I was no longer the hopeful boy dreaming beneath the oaks, nor the confident young man who'd chased justice. I became a man defined by his losses, carrying an emptiness that resonated in every heartbeat. And yet, in those quiet moments, when the world outside was still, I felt the faintest pulse of something new, the possibility that acceptance, however painful, might be the first step toward living with the ghost of my former self. I'll never forget the morning it happened, though to anyone else, it might have looked like just another gray dawn. I was sitting on my old rocker, that same one by the trailer window, cradling a chipped mug of coffee so cold it burned my lips. I'd been staring out at the railroad tracks, lost in the same tired thoughts, that freedom was a word I'd long ago lost the right to use, that trust was a lie I could no longer afford. Then, from nowhere, the front door creaked open and my neighbor, Miss Lorraine, shuffled in with her knitting basket and a shy smile. She just returned from the hospital, she said, having lost her husband to a sudden heart attack. She sat down beside me without a word, set her basket on my knee, and handed me a single skein of yarn. "Thought you might like to learn," she whispered. "Keeps the mind quiet." Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she managed a nod that said more than any sermon ever could, that even broken hearts could find a way to stitch themselves back together. I took that skein, soft, pale blue like a forgiving sky, and ran my fingers through its fibers. It felt strange, almost alien, to touch something so delicate, but as Lorraine began to teach me the simple loop-and pull of the first stitch, I felt a tiny spark flicker inside. My hands, which had trembled from years of regret, began to steady. With each loop, I felt the knot of sorrow in my chest loosen just a bit, as though the yarn were drawing out the old ache and weaving in something new. That afternoon, I taught myself to count stitches, to pull the thread just so, and for once, I wasn't fighting off nightmares or sinking into old guilt. I was simply making something. A scarf, maybe. A blanket for a child I'd never held. But it didn't matter what. What mattered was that my hands had work to do, and my mind had a rhythm to follow. And when Lorraine left, basket in hand, she paused at the door and said, "You've got a good heart, Henry. Don't let the world tell you different." She smiled, and I felt my own lips twitch in return, the first real smile in years. The next day, I wrapped that half-finished scarf around my neck and walked into town. It was like stepping into a world I'd forgotten existed. Folks nodding at me, Mrs. Jenkins offering a piece of pie without reproach, the librarian smiling as I returned a book I'd never read. I realized then that small kindnesses, when given freely, could echo louder than the roar of injustice. And if I could accept them, maybe I could start giving them too. So I began by helping Miss Lorraine carry groceries, one bag at a time, letting her lean on me when her arm shook. I fixed the neighbor boy's broken gate, even though my back protested every nail I hammered. I offered a cup of coffee to the mailman, who told me about his daughter's dance recital, and I listened, really listened, as though his words mattered more than any echo of my own suffering. Each act felt like a stitch in the frayed fabric of my life, pulling me back from the edge of solitude. Weeks turned into months, and the scarf grew longer, a testament to every moment I chose connection over withdrawal. I found myself looking forward to mornings, to the quiet promise of what I might build with my own 2 hands, and with my own 2 feet planted firmly in the here and now. I started writing again, but this time not letters to ghosts. I wrote thank you notes to the folks who showed me mercy without asking for anything in return. I wrote a short piece for the local newsletter about forgiveness, about how it wasn't a gift you gave to others, but a freedom you granted yourself. The editor printed it, and I saw my words in ink, proof that the man I'd been wasn't the man I had to remain. And so, in that slow dawning of second chances, I discovered something I thought was lost forever. Hope doesn't have to roar like thunder to be real. Sometimes it's just the soft click of 2 knitting needles, the gentle nod of a neighbor, the simple courage to let yourself begin again, 1 stitch at a time. I've carried that lighter with my initials for so many years that its metal edges worn smooth against my palm, a constant whisper of what I lost and what I almost became. But today, I laid it on the edge of my workbench and watched it glint in the afternoon light before I closed my fist around it and crushed it into the gravel. In that moment, I felt something crack inside me too, like a chain snapping free. I remembered every hollow hour I spent replaying that night in '81, every bitter taste of shame when folks called me a killer, every ache of missing years that no tears could refill. And I realized that holding on to the weight of blame only kept me anchored in a prison of my own making. I decided then and there that my story wouldn't end in a jail cell or a courtroom or the cold isolation of my trailer. It would end with a man who chose to stand up from his regrets and walk forward, step by careful step, toward whatever life remained to be lived. I went inside and took down the quilt Mama made, the one full of patches from happier days, and draped it over my shoulders like a promise. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender and old denim, and I let its warmth settle over my chest like a benediction. I felt the ghosts of childhood laughter and Sunday sermons stir beside me, not to haunt me, but to guide me. With that quilt wrapped around my old bones, I wrote a letter to the daughter I abandoned, tears blotting the ink as I asked her to meet me one Sunday afternoon at the cafe where I used to sip black coffee and dream of redemption. I sent another to the granddaughter I'd shied away from, enclosing a photo of the 2 of us laughing next to the cottonwood tree I planted long ago, promising that I'd come when she was ready. Then I packed a single bag, an extra blanket, clean clothes, and that half-finished scarf I knitted with Lorraine's help, and I climbed into my truck. As I turned the key, the engine's hum felt like a heartbeat returning after a long stillness. I drove down the trackless road toward the town where they once called me Monster, and I felt, for the first time in decades, unafraid. I parked outside the diner where Mrs. Jenkins still wiped tables, and I saw her glance at me, eyes softening instead of hardening. I nodded, that simple tilt of my head carrying more apology and gratitude than any words could muster. Later, I walked into the cafe and saw my daughter standing by the window, coffee cup in hand, surprise and caution dancing in her gaze. My heart thundered, but I folded and handed her that old quilt, now patched with new stitches of hope, and whispered, "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm choosing to be here now." Her eyes welled, and she took the quilt with trembling hands. And in that exchange, I felt the blockade around my heart give way. I understood that the past had happened, true, but it didn't have to define the man I was meant to be today. I chose to let go of guilt, to welcome forgiveness, to live without holding on to shadows. I chose to write each new day with kindness instead of regret, and as I stepped into the sunlight beside my daughter, I realized that freedom isn't given by a judge or granted by fate. Freedom is a choice, a decision to let the light back in, one small act of courage at a time. I've walked through fire and silence to learn a truth that isn't found in books or sermons, but in the quiet chambers of a man's own heart, that the heaviest chains we bear are the ones we forge ourselves, and the brightest light is the one we kindle when we choose to let go. For decades I carried guilt like a burden so vast it eclipsed the sun, believing that my past defined my worth and that forgiveness was a luxury reserved for saints. But I discovered, in the simple act of crushing that old lighter and wrapping myself in Mama's quilt, that freedom isn't granted by courts or measured in years served. It's claimed in the moment we turn our faces toward hope and decide to live again. I learned that trust is not a naive gamble, but a deliberate choice to open your hand even when it trembles, to offer kindness knowing it might not be returned, and to walk forward into uncertainty with the conviction that each step can heal what came before. I saw that forgiveness isn't a sign of weakness but the strongest armor a man can wear, because it shields the soul from the corrosive acid of resentment. And I found that love, whether offered by a neighbor's gentle smile or a daughter's hesitant embrace, can stitch the frayed ends of a broken life into something whole and new. What I understand now is that waiting for life to make sense is like staring at an empty chair and hoping someone will sit. You've got to stand up, take that chair by the legs, and move it yourself to the table where real people gather, to the porch where stories are shared, to the world that needs your voice. Maybe it's time for you, wherever you are, to stop waiting on your ghosts to leave and to start inviting the living in. Maybe you've been carrying anger so long it's carved hollows into your ribs, or shame so deep it echoes in every mirror you pass. I tell you this as a man who has seen those shadows. You can choose to drop them. You can choose to reach out, to write that letter, to knock on that old friend's door, or simply to look at the sunrise and say, I'm here, and today I choose kindness. I don't stand here as a preacher hawking easy answers. My life isn't a parable wrapped neat and tidy. But if there's one thing I can give you from my 70+ years, it's the gift of perspective, that the moments we dread defining us are often the very ones that teach us what we're made of. Your worst day may be your beginning, if you let it. And your tears, when shed in the presence of grace, whether from a stranger's generosity or your own act of courage, can water the seed of a life lived fully, bravely, and without regret. So if you're listening, I hope you'll hear me. Don't wait for tomorrow's apology or next year's resolution. Don't let the weight of what happened crush the promise of what can be. Take up your own quilt, write your own letter, and step out onto the sunlit road of second chances. If an old man like me can learn to trust again, to love again, to forgive himself and others, then so can you. And somewhere down that path, you might just find that the truth you've been seeking was waiting patiently inside you all along. I lean forward now, as if you're sitting here on this old porch beside me, and I want you to feel the warmth of these words like the late afternoon sun on your shoulders. This story of mine, it ain't just about a crime that stole my freedom or a brother's betrayal that nearly broke my heart. It's about every one of us who's ever carried a secret hope, a buried sorrow, or a flicker of love that refuses to die. I've walked through darkness, and I've learned that even after the deepest night, a single star can guide you home. So I ask you, right here, right now, do you believe true love, even the kind that seems lost, should find its way back to you? Maybe you've loved someone who drifted away, or perhaps you've held on to a memory so tightly you've forgotten what it feels like to let go. I've done both. I've cursed the silence that followed my wrongful conviction, and I've treasured the quiet moments of forgiveness that followed my own choice to heal. If you've ever wondered whether something real can circle back into your life when all odds say it's gone, then this question is for you. Is it in your heart to welcome that return, to accept it without fear? I think about Clara sometimes, the girl with rain-slick eyes who sparked a flame in me when everything else was cold. I think about my daughter's hesitant hug when we met again, and I wonder if she ever feels the echo of that day, like I do, like the past and present are forever holding hands in the shape of our lives. And I believe, deep down, that the people we love remember us in ways we can't always understand. I catch myself imagining that Clara still waits by that old chapel, or that my daughter looks at her baby the way she once looked at me, her grandfather, with that same mixture of surprise and hope. But that's the beauty of an open ending. It lives beyond the words, in the quiet spaces of your own heart. I leave this tale with you not as a closed book, but as a turned page, spilling sunlight onto the next chapter you're writing. Maybe you'll find the courage to pick up your own lighter, the one carved with your initials, and decide whether to let it burn bright or to crush it and forge something new. Maybe you'll write a letter to someone you've hurt or someone who's hurt you. Maybe you'll simply whisper into the night, "I forgive you," and feel the weight lift, if only for a moment. So when you walk away from this story, carry this question with you. What would you do if the love you lost came knocking on your door, soft as a breath and steady as a heartbeat? Would you open up? Would you listen? And would you let it in? I can't say what tomorrow will bring, nor should I. But sometimes, on a still evening when the wind shifts just right, I swear I hear a familiar laughter drifting down the tracks. And in those moments, I dare to believe that true love doesn't vanish, it simply waits for the right time to return. What about you, friend? Do you think it's time to welcome back what once was?